My family refused to attend my debut gallery exhibition because they felt my late-in-life passion was humiliating. But when I stepped into the foyer, the last person I ever anticipated seeing was waiting by the door. My kids boycotted the biggest night of my life because they feared looking bad. I am 65. I just secured my first solo art show in Chicago, and my son and daughter decided their professional reputations mattered more than my 45 years of sacrifice. Declan said it at brunch. Mom, imagine how humiliating it is for my law partners to see your weird abstract paintings on Instagram. It makes you look completely unstable. Petra nodded like that was a rational thing to say. I sat with the weight of that insult. Then I put on my velvet dress and took an Uber to the gallery, completely alone. My name is Iris. I gave up my dream of becoming a professional painter at 20 when my ex-husband vanished, leaving me with 2 toddlers and massive debt. I spent 4 decades working as a bank teller, raising kids, and watching everyone else's vibrant lives take shape while my canvases sat in a damp basement. My older sister Sylvie never let me forget the fire was there. You are going to hang in a real gallery, Iris, she would say, dropping off oil paints I could never afford. She died of cancer 8 years ago. I finally rented a studio the following autumn. When Declan and Petra found out I was exhibiting at the Mercer Gallery, they had a cruel dismissal ready. Who buys art from a 65-year-old retiree? Declan scoffed. Aunt Sylvie fed your delusions, Petra added. We live in the real world. Please do not embarrass us. They exchanged that tight, corporate look. They just did not show up. I stood in the Mercer Gallery at 7:30 p.m., surrounded by collectors, telling myself it was fine. I produced 30 breathtaking pieces. That had to be enough. Another artist asked if my children were near the catering table. A last-minute emergency, I lied smoothly. He nodded like he believed me. He definitely did not. Then the gallery owner, Rowan, appeared, looking out of breath. Iris, someone is waiting in my office. My stomach plummeted. For one pathetic second, I thought Declan and Petra had actually shown up. They had not. An older woman stood by Rowan's desk, her sharp eyes studying me. It was Nadine Holt, the most ruthless art critic in the Midwest, and my college professor from 45 years ago. I turned to Rowan, bewildered. How did you get her here? Your portfolio, Rowan said. You included a charcoal study of her from 1980. I reached out to her office. Nadine pulled a heavy leather sketchbook from her bag. Your sister Sylvie mailed this to me right before she passed away, Nadine said. She included a check for an appraisal and made me swear to hold it until your very first exhibition. My hand started trembling violently. The handwriting on the inside cover hit me like a physical blow. I would recognize those looping letters anywhere. Iris, if you are reading this, your colors are finally on a wall where they belong. I never once doubted your brilliance, even on the nights you threw your brushes in tears. I know you were always going to wait until everyone else was secure first. The bills, the crises Declan and Petra threw at you that felt more urgent than your own soul. But the talent never vanished. It just went into hibernation. So, if you are standing surrounded by your masterpieces right now, I hope you are as fiercely proud of yourself as I have always been of you. Paint the world blind. I love you. I could not pull air into my lungs. Rowan waited until I lowered the book. Iris, he said gently, would you allow me to read her inscription to the patrons outside? Not just to sell art, to let them understand exactly what it took to get you into this room. I hesitated. The instinct to hide was hard to shake. Only if you want them to know the truth, he added. I nodded. He walked me out to the main floor and tapped a spoon against his glass. The gallery went silent as Rowan told 150 wealthy strangers about a mother who waited 45 years for this exact moment, who sacrificed her youth for ungrateful children, and who stood here tonight without family to celebrate her triumph. The entire room erupted. People cheered, whistling and raising their glasses. I stood there with Sylvie's sketchbook pressed against my chest, surrounded by complete strangers validating my existence in a way my own flesh and blood refused to do. And then Nadine leaned close and whispered 5 words I was not prepared for. Sylvie left you something else. Nadine's hand dipped back into her oversized leather tote. The cheering of the room behind me felt like it was happening underwater. My ears were ringing. Nadine pulled out a thick, legal-sized envelope. The edges were worn soft, as if she had been carrying it in different bags for a very long time. She pressed it into my free hand. The paper felt heavy, dense with whatever was inside. Sylvie knew you wouldn't just need validation, Nadine said, her voice dropping beneath the noise of the crowd. She knew you would need a runway. When she sent me the sketchbook 8 years ago, she also sent this. It's a trust document. She funded it with the life insurance payout from her first husband's accident. She put it in my name as a blind executor so your kids couldn't find it and bleed you dry before you were ready to paint. I stared at the envelope, my thumb tracing the seal. How much? $60,000, Nadine said flatly. Earmarked strictly for studio space, materials, gallery fees, and self-promotion. She paid my appraisal fee out of her own pocket, but the trust was entirely for you. I've been sitting on it, investing it conservatively, waiting for you to stop making excuses and pick up a brush. It's worth closer to $80,000 now. I had to lean back against the wall. $80,000. For 40 years, I had agonized over the electric bill. I had bought discount groceries, worn shoes until the soles wore completely through, and worked overtime shifts at the bank just to make sure Declan could go to a decent college and Petra could afford her postgraduate certifications. And all that time, Sylvie had quietly built a fortress for me, hiding it in plain sight with the most terrifying woman I had ever met. Why you? I asked, my voice cracking. Sylvie barely knew you. She didn't know me at all, Nadine replied, her sharp features softening just a fraction. But she knew I was the only person in Chicago who wouldn't care if you cried about needing the money for groceries. My instructions were strictly legal. You get nothing until you secure a solo exhibition. Sylvie knew your maternal guilt would always win. Declan. If you knew you had 80 grand, you would have spent it on a down payment for Declan's house or Petra's wedding. She made me the gatekeeper. Rowan returned to our corner, holding a tray with 2 glasses of champagne. He handed one to me and one to Nadine. His eyes were bright, moving constantly across the floor. Iris, Rowan said, barely containing his grin. Look at the walls. I turned my head. Next to my paintings, my weird, abstract, humiliating paintings, were tiny red stickers. One on the piece I called Hibernation, one on Rust and Bone, 3 on the smaller canvases near the front window. 9 sold, Rowan said, in 20 minutes. You just cleared 40 grand in commissions, Iris, and the night is barely starting. The rest of the evening was a blur of handshakes, flashing phone cameras, and wealthy strangers asking me about my process. I spoke about the damp basement, the smell of cheap oil paint, the way the colors felt like a secret language I was finally allowed to speak aloud. I did not mention my children again. I didn't have to. The narrative was already cemented in the room. I was the long-suffering artist who had finally broken out of her cage. By midnight, the gallery was empty. I stood in the center of the hardwood floor, my heels kicked off, staring at 18 red dots. I had made more money in 4 hours than I had in my last 2 years at the bank. Rowan hugged me tightly, smelling of expensive gin and exhaustion, and locked the doors behind us. I took an Uber back to my apartment. The contrast was physically jarring. I walked up the 3 flights of stairs to my cramped 2-bedroom unit in Logan Square. The linoleum in the kitchen was peeling at the corners. The faucet dripped. I sat at my small formica table, still in my velvet dress, and laid Sylvie's sketchbook and the envelope in front of me. I didn't open the envelope yet. I just placed my hands flat on top of it, breathing in the silence of my apartment, feeling a profound, terrifying sense of freedom. I woke up the next morning at 10 o'clock. My body ached from the tension, but my mind was incredibly clear. I made a pot of cheap coffee out of habit, poured a mug, and finally looked at my phone. There were 17 missed calls, 14 from Declan, 3 from Petra. My heart did its usual, conditioned spike of anxiety. For decades, a missed call from my children meant an emergency, a forgotten bill, a crisis with Declan's wife, a breakdown over Petra's workload. I tapped on my text messages. Mom, pick up the phone right now. Mom, what is this? Did you tell a reporter to write this? Call me. Now? I frowned, scrolling past Declan's frantic text to find a link Petra had sent at 6 in the morning. It was to a website for a prominent Chicago arts and culture magazine. The headline read, "The 65-year-old debutante, Iris Voss, and the masterpieces her family ignored." I clicked the link. The article was written by a journalist named Marcus Strand. He had been at the gallery. I vaguely remembered shaking his hand near the catering table. Marcus hadn't just reviewed the art, he had reviewed the moment. He transcribed Rowan's speech almost word for word. He described the emotional atmosphere in the room, the raw power of my sister's posthumous letter, and the glaring, conspicuous absence of my children. Voss's work is a testament to the endurance of the female spirit, Marcus wrote near the end of the piece. But it is also a damning indictment of the familial structures that demand total sacrifice from mothers, only to discard them when they dare to reclaim their own identities. Her son and daughter were not in attendance last night. They missed a triumph. But looking at the explosive vitality on the walls of the Mercer Gallery, one gets the feeling Iris Voss no longer needs them to witness her light. I stared at the screen. The words were beautiful, validating, and utterly devastating. My phone buzzed in my hand. It was Declan again. I let it ring 3 times before I answered. "Hello, Declan. What the hell is this, Mom?" His voice wasn't just angry. It was laced with a tight, panicked edge I usually only heard when he was in trouble at work. "Did you put this guy up to this? Did you tell him to write this garbage?" "I didn't tell anyone to write anything," I said, keeping my voice level. "A journalist was at the gallery. He heard Rowan read Sylvie's letter." "You let the gallery owner read Aunt Sylvie's letter to a room full of people?" Declan shouted. I could hear the echo of a parking garage in the background. "Are you insane? Do you have any idea how this makes us look? My phone has been blowing up all morning. The senior partners at my firm read this magazine. Mom, it's on the coffee tables in the damn waiting rooms. Maybe you should have come to the show," I said softly. "We were busy." He fired back, the lie coming so easily to him. "I told you we had professional obligations. You completely threw us under the bus for a PR stunt so you could sell some paintings." The accusation felt like a slap. "I didn't do this for PR, Declan. You told me my art was humiliating. You told me I made you look unstable." The journalist simply reported the truth of an empty room. "I need you to fix this," Declan said, ignoring my words completely. "I need you to call this Marcus guy or the gallery and issue a retraction. Tell them we had a family emergency. Tell them we were supportive but couldn't make it. Petra is losing her mind over here." "I'm not doing that," I said. There was a dead silence on the line. "What did you just say?" I said, "No, Declan. I'm not lying to protect you from the consequences of your own cruelty. You made your choice at brunch." "Mom," his voice dropped into a low, threatening register. "Do not do this. Do not make this a thing. I am up for junior partner next month. You are not going to ruin this for me because you're having some late-in-life crisis." I hung up the phone. My hands were shaking so badly I had to put the coffee mug down on the counter. I had never hung up on my son in my entire life. I had always been the mediator, the one who smoothed things over, the one who apologized even when I hadn't done anything wrong. The silence in the kitchen felt heavy, pregnant with the fallout of what I had just done. I opened the envelope Nadine had given me. Inside were legal documents, the trust agreement, and a cashier's check made out to me for $82,000. Tucked behind the check was a small, handwritten note on Sylvie's personal stationery. "Iris, if you are holding this, you finally did it. Do not give them a dime. Paint, just paint." An hour later, I was dressed in jeans and an oversized sweater, walking to the bank. Not the branch where I used to work, but a different one downtown. I deposited the check into a brand new separate separate account. As the teller handed me the receipt, I felt a strange shift in my chest. For the first time in my life, I had a safety net that was entirely my own. I stepped out of the bank and into the cold Chicago wind, intending to take the L train up to my studio. But as I turned the corner, I saw Petra standing near the entrance of the train station. She was wearing her sharp gray wool coat, holding a paper cup of coffee, looking aggressively out of place among the commuters. She had obviously tracked my location through the family app we all shared on our phones. I stopped. She saw me and marched over, her heels clicking sharply against the pavement. "We need to talk," Petra said, her eyes flashing. She didn't say hello. She didn't ask how the show went. "I'm going to my studio, Petra. You're going to come have a coffee with me right now," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. Before Declan does something stupid. Against my better judgment, I followed her into a quiet bakery down the street. We sat in a booth by the window. Petra didn't take her coat off. She folded her hands on the table and leaned in. "Declan is panicking," Petra said quietly. "He thinks this article is going to tank his partnership review. His father-in-law already made a comment about it this morning. Something about how family loyalty reflects corporate loyalty." "I'm sorry he's stressed," I said, looking at my hands. "But I didn't write the article." "You let them read the letter, Mom. You let them turn us into villains." Petra's voice was tight, controlled. "You know how hard Declan works. You know the pressure he's under with Vivian and the new mortgage." "I know," I said. "And I know how hard I worked for 45 years so he could have the life where a mortgage like that was even possible." Petra scoffed, a short, bitter sound. "Don't do the martyr thing. You made your choices. But right now, we have a real problem. Declan is looking into legal options." I looked up, stunned. Legal options? Against who? Against the gallery. Against the journalist. Defamation, slander, whatever he can make stick. Petra sighed, rubbing her temples. "I told him it's a terrible idea, that it will only draw more attention to it. But he's terrified. He said he went by your apartment this morning and you weren't there. He went to my apartment? He wanted to talk to you in person. He said he found an envelope on your kitchen table." My blood ran completely cold. I had left Sylvie's trust documents and the empty envelope on the Formica table when I rushed out to the bank. "He took pictures of the documents." "Mom," Petra said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "He knows about the trust. He knows Aunt Sylvie left you 80 grand. I sat frozen in the booth. The betrayal cut so deep it physically ached. My son had let himself into my apartment, snooped through my belongings, and photographed private legal documents. He says the money should be split," Petra continued, refusing to meet my eyes now. "He says since Aunt Sylvie used life insurance money, it's technically family assets. And since he and I had to take out student loans because you couldn't afford our tuition, we are entitled to a portion of it to offset our debts." "That is a lie," I whispered, my voice trembling with a mixture of rage and grief. "That money was specifically left in trust for me. Nadine Holt managed it. It is legally mine. Declan says he can tie it up in probate court for years if he challenges the structure of the blind trust," Petra said coldly. "He doesn't want to do that, Mom, but he is desperate. He needs capital to buy into the partnership, and he's completely over-leveraged on the house. He sees this 80 grand, plus whatever you made at the gallery last night, as a way out." "And what do you see it as, Petra?" I asked, staring hard at my daughter. She finally looked at me. Her eyes were hard, calculating. "I see it as a mess. I don't need your money, but I need this PR nightmare to go away. Declan told me if you give him $50,000 from the trust, he will drop the defamation threats against your gallery and issue a public statement congratulating you on your show, saying we had a private family celebration beforehand. They were blackmailing me. My own children were trying to extort the money my dead sister left me to protect their fragile egos and fund their lifestyles." "No," I said, sliding out of the booth. "Mom, think about this," Petra snapped, finally showing a crack in her composure. "Declan is ruthless when he is backed into a corner. He will drag this gallery owner into a legal battle. He will make your life miserable. Just give him the money. You already got your show. Tell your brother," I said, standing over the table, "that if he contacts my gallery, or if he ever sets foot in my apartment again without my permission, I will call the police." I walked out of the bakery before she could respond. The wind hit me, biting and sharp, but I felt a strange, terrifying heat radiating from my chest. I took the L train to the Mercer Gallery instead of my studio. I needed to see Rowan. I needed to warn him. When I arrived, the gallery was closed to the public, but the lights were on inside. I knocked on the glass. Rowan looked up from his desk in the back, smiled, and buzzed me in. "The conquering hero returns," Rowan called out, walking toward me. "I was just going over the invoices. We have 3 more inquiries from out of state. Rowan, we need to talk," I said, my voice shaking. "There's a problem." I sat in his office and told him everything. I told him about the phone calls, the article, Declan breaking into my apartment, and the threat of a defamation lawsuit. I expected Rowan to panic. I expected him to tell me this was too much drama, that he was a businessman, not a family therapist. Instead, Rowan leaned back in his chair, steepled his fingers, and let out a long, slow breath. "Iris, your son is a junior lawyer trying to throw his weight around," Rowan said calmly. "Defamation requires a false statement of fact. Everything I said last night and everything Marcus wrote was an opinion based on the true fact that they did not attend the event. Any judge would laugh him out of the room. He's bluffing to scare you. He wants the trust money," I said, wiping a frustrated tear from my cheek. "He's going to try to challenge it." "Then let him try," a voice said from the doorway. I jumped. Nadine Holt was standing there, wrapped in a heavy trench coat, holding a cardboard tray of coffees. "Nadine," Rowan said, standing up. "I didn't expect you back today. I forgot my reading glasses in your break room," Nadine said, stepping into the office and handing me a coffee. She looked at me with those piercing, analytical eyes. "I heard most of that. Your son sounds exactly like the kind of mediocre man who resents female talent. Let him sue. The trust is ironclad. I made sure of it 8 years ago. My lawyers are considerably more expensive and vicious than whatever mid-tier firm he works for. I gripped the warm coffee cup, feeling a sudden, overwhelming wave of gratitude for these two people who had known me for less than 24 hours, yet were defending me fiercely. "Thank you," I whispered. "Don't thank me yet," Nadine said, sitting down in the chair next to mine. "We have a bigger issue, or rather, a bigger opportunity, depending on how much stomach you have for conflict." I looked between her and Rowan. "What do you mean?" Rowan cleared his throat and picked up a thick, glossy folder from his desk. "An hour ago, I got a call from an art consultant named Silas Whitfield. He represents major corporate clients downtown. He curates lobbies, executive suites, boardroom collections. He saw the article this morning, and," I asked, "he wants to purchase Hibernation," Rowan said, "and he wants to commission 4 more pieces in a similar style. The total contract would be around $120,000. My jaw physically dropped. 120, yes, Nadine interrupted smoothly. "It would completely establish you. You would never have to worry about money again. But there is a catch." Rowan opened the folder and slid a business card across the desk. It had Silas Whitfield's name on it, and underneath the logo of his current primary client, Brennan, Halvorson and Tate, attorneys at law. I stared at the card. The letters blurred together. Brennan, Halvorson and Tate. "That's Declan's firm," I breathed. "Exactly," Nadine said. "Silas was hired by the senior partners, specifically a man named Arthur Brennan, to modernize their lobby. They want to project a progressive, empathetic image. Arthur Brennan read the article about you this morning. He loved the narrative of the overlooked, resilient older woman. He told Silas to acquire your work for the main reception area." "Does he know?" I asked, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Does Arthur Brennan know that the ungrateful son in the article is Declan?" "No," Rowan said softly. "Declan's last name is Voss. Your last name is Voss. But it's a massive firm, and Arthur Brennan is at the very top." Silas confirmed that Brennan has no idea the connection exists. He just wants the art. "If I sell it to them," I said, my mind racing, piecing together the horrifying, brilliant geometry of the situation. "My paintings," the paintings Declan said would humiliate him, "will be hanging in the lobby of his own firm." "Not just hanging," Nadine corrected, a predatory smirk playing on her lips. "They will be the centerpiece. The partners will brag about acquiring them. Declan will have to walk past your success every single day. He will have to listen to his bosses praise the mother he abandoned." "But if Declan is threatening to sue the gallery," I stammered, "won't this make it worse? Won't he try to block the sale?" "He can't block the sale," Rowan said. "He's a junior associate. He has no authority over building acquisitions. If he complains to the senior partners that you are his mother, he has to admit that he is the villain in the viral article they all love. He would be committing professional suicide." I sat back in the chair, the coffee turning cold in my hands. The symmetry of it was staggering. Declan had demanded I give him my money to secure his position at the firm. Now, the firm was offering me a fortune to put my art right in front of his face. "Silas wants to meet," Rowan said gently. "He wants to take you to the building this afternoon to look at the space, get a feel for the lighting, and sign the preliminary agreement. You don't have to do it, Iris. If it's too close, if it's too painful, I will call Silas and tell him the piece is no longer available." I closed my eyes. I pictured the damp basement. I pictured the 45 years of canceled plans, the faded winter coats, the exhaustion that settled in my bones while I raised 2 children who grew up to view me as a liability. I pictured Declan standing in my kitchen this morning, photographing my private letters, trying to steal Sylvie's final gift to me. I opened my eyes. "What time is the meeting?" Nadine's smirk widened into a genuine, terrifying smile. 2 o'clock. I didn't go back to my apartment to change. There was no time, and frankly, I didn't care. For 45 years, I had dressed to make other people comfortable. I wore sensible beige cardigans at the bank so I wouldn't stand out. I wore muted colors around Declan's in-laws so they wouldn't think less of my son for coming from a working-class background. Today, I was going to the most prestigious law firm in Chicago, wearing a pair of paint-stained jeans and a heavy wool sweater. Rowan called Silas Whitfield and confirmed the meeting. Nadine stayed in the gallery, sipping her coffee and looking extremely pleased with herself. I took a cab downtown. The address Silas had given us was a towering glass monolith on Wacker Drive, the kind of building where the lobby alone probably cost more than my entire neighborhood. Silas was waiting by the revolving doors. He was in his late 30s, wearing a perfectly tailored navy suit and holding a leather portfolio. When I walked up, he blinked for a fraction of a second at my outfit, but recovered instantly. Art consultants know how to handle eccentricities. In fact, my paint-stained jeans probably just cemented the authentic artist brand he was selling to his clients. "Iris," he said, extending a warm, manicured hand. "It is an absolute honor. I was at the gallery last night. I didn't get a chance to speak with you, but your work is visceral. It's exactly what Arthur is looking for." I shook his hand. "Thank you, Silas," led the way. We walked into the main lobby of Brennan, Halvorson and Tate. The space was enormous, all polished white marble, brushed steel, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Chicago River. It was sterile. It felt like a mausoleum for money. I looked at the massive blank wall behind the sweeping reception desk. That was where they wanted my colors. Silas guided me toward a bank of private elevators. "Arthur is coming down to meet us," Silas explained. "He rarely gets involved in the aesthetic choices for the firm, but Marcus Strand's article really moved him. He feels your story perfectly aligns with the firm's new commitment to resilience and unearthing hidden value." It took everything in me not to laugh out loud. Resilience, unearthing hidden value. Corporate speak for wanting to look like they had a soul. A sharp ding echoed through the cavernous space, and the brass doors of the private elevator slid open. 2 men stepped out. The first was an older gentleman with silver hair, a custom 3-piece suit, and the kind of relaxed posture that only comes from having absolute power over everyone everyone in the room. This was obviously Arthur Brennan. The second man, walking half a step behind him, carrying a stack of files and looking visibly stressed, was my son, Declan. My heart stopped. I hadn't prepared for this. I knew he worked here. I knew the risk, but I hadn't expected him to be the one trailing behind the senior partner at this exact moment. His eyes were glued to the files in his hands as he rattled off something about a summary judgment. "Leave it on my desk, Voss," Arthur Brennan said, waving a hand dismissively. He hadn't even looked at Declan. His eyes were fixed on me. His face broke into a wide, charismatic smile. "You must be Iris." Declan froze. The files in his hands slipped, scattering a half-dozen papers onto the polished marble floor. His head snapped up. All the color drained from his face. I didn't look at my son. I stepped forward and shook Arthur Brennan's hand. "Mr. Brennan, it's a pleasure to meet you. Please, call me Arthur," he said, his grip firm. "I cannot tell you how thrilled I am that Silas got you here so quickly. I read the piece this morning. Tragic what your family put you through, truly. But looking at you now, I see nothing but triumph. We need that kind of energy in this building." I could hear the ragged sound of Declan breathing. He was practically vibrating with panic. He was down on one knee, mechanically picking up the papers he had dropped, but he wasn't looking at them. He was staring at me, his mouth open but nothing came out. What could he say? That he was the ungrateful son who called my art humiliating? "Thank you, Arthur," I said smoothly, turning slightly so Declan was in my peripheral vision. I must admit, this building is quite a contrast to my basement studio, but I think a large-scale piece right behind the reception desk would bring some much-needed warmth to the marble. "Exactly what I told the board," Arthur boomed. He gestured to the wall. "Silas thinks a triptych. 3 pieces. Cohesive, but distinct. Are you open to a commission of that scale?" "I am," I said. Declan finally stood up. His hands were shaking. He clutched the messy stack of files to his chest like a shield. "Mr. Brennan," he interrupted, his voice cracking. I'm sorry, I just need to clarify something about the summary judgment." Arthur Brennan frowned, clearly annoyed at the interruption. He looked at Declan as if noticing him for the first time. "Not right now, Voss. Can't you see I'm with a guest? Have one of the paralegals draft the addendum. It's just," Declan swallowed hard. His eyes were pleading with me, begging me not to blow his cover, begging me to disappear. "It's highly sensitive, sir." Arthur sighed heavily. "Fine. Give me 2 minutes, Iris. I apologize for the interruption." He turned his back to me and pulled Declan a few feet away, lowering his voice to deliver what looked like a harsh reprimand. Silas leaned in next to me. "He's brutal on the junior associates," he murmured. "They practically live at the office. High turnover rate, but it pays well." "I'm sure it does," I said quietly. Arthur finished scolding Declan and turned back to us with a polite smile. Declan didn't leave. He stood there, rooted to the spot, completely trapped. If he walked away, he left me alone with his boss, terrified of what I might reveal. If he stayed, he had to watch the mother he had boycotted negotiate a 6-figure deal in his own lobby. "Now, about the timeline," Arthur said, ignoring Declan's lingering presence. "We're hosting a major charity gala in this lobby next month, the 25th. It's a tight turnaround, I know, but if we could have the pieces installed by then, it would be magnificent. I would love for you to attend as our guest of honor. We could formally unveil the work, a gala, in this lobby, with the entire firm in attendance." I looked past Arthur's shoulder, straight at Declan. His eyes were wide with absolute horror. He gave his head a microscopic, frantic shake. "I work quite fast when the inspiration is right, Arthur," I said, holding Declan's gaze. "I think the 25th is entirely manageable." Arthur clapped his hands together. "Fantastic. Silas will draw up the contracts today. 120,000 for the triptych, plus the acquisition of the piece from the gallery. Is that agreeable?" Declan choked on a breath. I heard the sharp, sudden sound of him inhaling. $120,000. More money than Declan made in a year before bonuses. And I was going to earn it by hanging the very art he despised in the center of his professional universe. "That is very agreeable," I said. "Splendid." Arthur smiled. He glanced back at Declan, frowning again. "Are you still here, Voss? I thought I told you to get with a paralegal." "Yes, sir," Declan managed to say. His voice sounded hollow, like he was speaking from inside a deep well. Right away. He didn't look at me again as he turned and walked toward the elevators. His shoulders were slumped. The arrogant, corporate swagger he usually carried himself with was completely gone. He looked small. I spent another 30 minutes with Silas and Arthur, measuring the wall, discussing color palettes, and talking about the natural light in the lobby. Arthur was surprisingly insightful about art, though his focus remained heavily on the narrative. He loved the idea of a woman rising from the ashes of domestic servitude. I let him talk. I didn't correct his assumptions or feed into them. I just stood in the center of that massive, expensive room, feeling the sheer weight of my new reality. By the time I left the building, the contracts were verbally agreed upon. Silas promised to email the paperwork to Rowan by the end of the day. I stepped out onto Wacker Drive, pulling my wool sweater tight against the wind off the river. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I knew who it was before I even looked at the screen. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, a text came through. "We are meeting for dinner tonight, 7 p.m., the steakhouse near my office. Don't say no, please." I stared at the screen. The please was new. Declan never said please unless he wanted money or a favor. I typed a brief response. "I will be there at 7. I put the phone away and walked to the train station. I felt exhausted, but the adrenaline was still keeping my blood pumping. I headed back to Logan Square to rest before dinner. I needed a clear head. Declan wasn't just panicked anymore. He was desperate, and desperate people make ugly mistakes. I arrived at the steakhouse exactly at 7. It was one of those dimly lit, hyper-masculine places with dark wood paneling, leather booths, and waiters wearing white jackets. Declan and his wife, Vivian, were already seated at a corner table. They looked like they were attending a funeral. Vivian was wearing a tight, expensive navy dress. She had always been polite to me, but in a distant, transactional way. She treated me like an eccentric aunt rather than her mother-in-law. When I slid into the booth opposite them, she offered a tight, forced smile. "Iris," Vivian said softly. "Congratulations on your show." "Thank you, Vivian," I said, opening my menu. I wasn't going to make this easy for them. I wasn't going to start the conversation. Declan leaned forward. He had dark circles under his eyes. "Mom, what the hell was that today?" "That was a commission meeting," I said, not looking up from the menu. "I believe the going rate is $120,000. Silas was very thorough." "You can't take that commission," Declan hissed, keeping his voice low so the neighboring tables wouldn't hear. "You know exactly what you're doing. You're doing this to punish me." I finally set the menu down and looked at my son. "Declan, not everything in the world revolves around you. A major corporate client offered me a contract. I accepted it. The fact that you work there is a coincidence. It's not a coincidence, and you know it," he whispered fiercely. "Arthur Brennan doesn't know who you are to me, but if he finds out, he'll think I was hiding it from him. He'll think I lied by omission. And if he finds out I'm the son from that article, the one who didn't show up to your gallery, he's big on family values. Mom, he fired a senior partner last year for missing his kid's graduation to go on a golf trip. It's his whole brand. Then I suggest you don't tell him," I said calmly. Vivian reached across the table and put her hand over mine. It was cold. "Iris, please, try to see this from our perspective. We just closed on the house in Lincoln Park. The mortgage is enormous. Declan is up for junior partner in 3 weeks. We have a baby on the way." I stopped breathing. The restaurant noise faded into a dull hum. I stared at Vivian. "You're pregnant?" Vivian nodded, tears springing to her eyes. 12 weeks. We were going to tell you at brunch yesterday, but the argument about your art show happened, and, well, we didn't. A grandchild. I was going to be a grandmother." For a split second, the old, deeply ingrained maternal instinct flared up. The instinct to drop everything, sacrifice everything, and make sure my child was safe and secure. I looked at Declan. He was watching my face, waiting for the capitulation he had relied on his entire life. But then I looked closer. His eyes weren't soft. They were calculating. He had brought Vivian here to deliver this news right now, specifically to leverage my emotions against my business deal. He was using his unborn child as a bargaining chip to get me to walk away from my art. The coldness returned, settling deep in my stomach, heavier and more permanent than before. I picked up the menu again. "Congratulations," I said. "I mean that sincerely. A baby is a profound thing, and I will love that child with everything I have." Vivian let out a shaky breath of relief. Declan's shoulders dropped. "But," I continued, "I am not withdrawing from the commission." Declan's face hardened instantly. "Mom, let me finish." I set the menu down, folded my hands, and looked at my son the way I should have looked at him years ago, with clarity instead of apology. "You walked into my apartment this morning without my permission. You photographed private legal documents. Then you sent your wife here to announce a pregnancy that you have been sitting on for 12 weeks, at the precise moment you needed me to feel something you could use against me." I looked at Vivian. "I don't blame you for this, Vivian. I genuinely don't. But I want you to understand what your husband just did, because you are about to raise a child with this man, and the patterns he learned somewhere." Vivian looked at Declan. Something crossed her face that I couldn't entirely read. Declan's jaw tightened. "So that's it? You're going to blow up my career because I missed one night?" "You didn't miss one night, Declan. You sat across from me at brunch and called my life's work humiliating. You called Sylvie delusional. And when you found out I had money of my own, you broke into my home to photograph it." I paused, letting each fact land separately, without softening, without the maternal instinct to rush past the ugly parts. "I spent 45 years making sure you never felt the kind of precarity I felt. I worked overnight shifts so you could go to a good school. I bought my groceries on markdown so your tuition was covered. And the one time in my entire life I asked for your witness, you decided your reputation was more important." Declan opened his mouth. I raised one hand. "I'm not finished." My voice was steady. I was surprised by how steady it was. "I am going to deliver those 3 paintings to Brennan, Halverson, and Tate by the 25th. I am going to attend the gala as Arthur Brennan's guest of honor. What you do with that information is entirely your decision. You can tell Arthur the truth, that you are my son and that you failed to attend my show, and you can discover what kind of man he actually is. Or you can say nothing and walk past my work every morning on your way to the elevator. Either way, I am done making myself smaller to fit inside the space you've decided I'm allowed to occupy." The table was silent. Somewhere behind us, a waiter recited the evening's specials to an oblivious couple. Vivian was looking down at her water glass. One finger traced the condensation slowly around the rim. Declan stared at me for a long time. The calculating look was gone. What replaced it was something I hadn't seen on my son's face since he was very small. Something unguarded and lost and genuinely frightened. Not of losing the partnership, of something else. Something harder to name. "When did you stop being scared of me?" he asked quietly. The question came out almost like a confession. I don't think he meant to say it at all. "Last night," I said honestly. "Standing in that gallery with 70 strangers and one dead sister, I stopped waiting for your permission." Vivian reached under the table and took Declan's hand. He let her. He looked down at the tablecloth, and for a moment the restaurant dissolved, and he was just a boy I had carried home from hospitals and driven to swim practice and watched grow into a man I sometimes didn't recognize. I loved him. That was the terrible, immovable fact at the center of all of it. I loved him the way you love something that has also hurt you, carefully, with both eyes open. "I would like to be part of this child's life," I said. "I would like to be the kind of grandmother Sylvie would have been, but I will not earn that by giving you Sylvie's money or walking away from my work. Those things are not on the table. What is on the table is dinner, if you still want it." Vivian was crying quietly now. She wasn't trying to hide it. She She pressed the back of her hand against her mouth and looked at me with something that might have been relief. Declan didn't speak for almost a full minute. The scallops were really good, he finally said. His voice came out rough, not quite right. It took me a second to understand. He had read the review. He had read every word of Marcus Strand's piece, including the part about the cedar-smoked scallop that the journalist called the best thing he'd tasted in 5 years. They were perfect, I said. Declan nodded slowly. He picked up his menu. His hands weren't steady, but he held it open. Okay, it wasn't an apology. It wasn't close to enough. We both knew it, and we both also knew that some things can only be rebuilt incrementally, over years, one careful conversation at a time. The foundation would have to be different now. There was no going back to the architecture of sacrifice and silence we had both gotten so comfortable living inside. The waiter came. We ordered. The food arrived, and we ate it, slowly and mostly quietly, with the careful, tentative rhythm of people who have just learned they are going to have to get to know each other again from scratch. Rowan called me on the cab ride home. 3 more pieces had sold. A collector from New York was inquiring about the entire remaining collection. I sat in the back of the cab, watching the lights of the city blur past the rain-streaked window, and thought about Sylvie. About the years she spent quietly building me a runway I didn't know existed. About the way she had understood, with devastating precision, that I would never use the money for myself until I had genuinely run out of ways to spend it on everyone else first. Paint the world blind. I pulled out my phone. I opened a new note and started writing. Not a response to Declan. Not a rebuttal to Petra. Just colors. Names of colors. The particular shade of amber the lamp threw across Arthur Brennan's marble lobby. The blue-gray light on the Chicago River through those enormous windows. 3 paintings. 30 days. I put my phone away and watched the city move past in the dark. The driver didn't say anything. The rain kept falling. And for the first time in longer than I could clearly remember, the silence didn't feel like something waiting to go wrong. It just felt like mine.